While I was leading Ferrari's design back in the early 2000s and busy designing the F430 and the FXX, one of my biggest challenges was to push the limits and to evolve the design language while respecting and retaining the richness of Ferrari's history. You can imagine then how difficult it must be for Ferrari to create a car for a segment where they've never ventured before. So today we're going to look at whether they've been able to pull it off with style with their new Ferrari Purosangue. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me here in the VEC for a new episode on the newest car from Ferrari stable, the Ferrari Purosangue. Now, you may know me as a supercar designer, and you might be questioning what knowledge do I have about SUVs? When in fact, I was tasked with exactly the same conundrum back in the early 90s when I worked with BMW and designed their first product in the SUV segment, which today is known as the X5, which means I can understand the difficulties of not having an existing platform or even a blueprint to build off of. And I can understand the pressure of designing something which is going to inform the entire lineage of a new segment for them. The only difference is that with the BMW X5, we took an extremely limited amount of time for the research and development to bring it to market, whereas Ferrari have taken their own dolce tempo, their own sweet time, to develop a product that is right for the market for them. They've taken so long, in fact, that they're one of the last marques to bring an SUV to the market, of which perhaps there are only, I think, McLaren and Bugatti could be the last ones resisting. However, McLaren might not be holding out too much longer because their new CEO is actually the same guy responsible for the Purosangue when he was at Ferrari. That's Michael Leiters. And previous to Ferrari, Michael was also the head guy at Porsche responsible for the Cayenne program. So go on, hold your breath, because we might be analyzing pretty soon the new McLaren SUV. But enough of the chit chat for now. Let's go into my analysis of the Ferrari Purosangue. Molto bella. Now this, for me, is a beautiful car. This is a beautiful Ferrari. It maintains, I think, the essence of what a Ferrari is all about. It's got that sensuality, it's dynamic, it's curvaceous, it's absolutely sexy. I have to say my first impression is, wow, they've done it, cavolo. And it maintains, again, something that we can read from the Ferrari Roma, the previous Ferrari Roma that came out, that gives it still that Ferrari personality. I mean, they've had a challenge to communicate a vehicle in this segment and still maintain that faithfulness, that adherence to what Ferrari is all about. And my gosh, have they done a beautiful job on it. Definitely, in my opinion, not an SUV. This for me is an Autobahn Stormer, or let's call it an Autostrada Stormer. Something that you're basically going to stay on road with. You're going to go in style, you're going to go in Ferrari style. It's all about performance. Without entering too much in critiques right from the get-go, there are a few areas I'll address probably, namely the front bumper area, the headlight area, the cut line for what is a clamshell, probably this area here, probably the mirrors, probably the door handles. And as we move to the rear, I can see a few issues here. And again, in this area here. Seems like a lot, but if I explain it, you'll start to understand why I'm a little bit critical of those areas. But let's get into the analysis of it. Let's dive into the front view first of all and see what there is that kind of, in my opinion, makes the car look good as well as perhaps could improve the car overall. All right, here we are with that all-important front view, that first impression of the face, of the caricature, of the expression of the vehicle. Let's look at the top here, the top surface of the bonnet, of the hood. What we're looking at is a typical Ferrari way of doing the hood, the area above the fender leading into the hood. That high point there, that peak with that crease coming through there, and then lowering down to a low point here, coming across and then having a slight rise, that area there being what we call the power dome. It gives you a sort of a dance of the highlights. They're moving all the time. It doesn't look static. It kind of gives it sort of a, again, that sculptural, that artistic sculptural look to it. Very pretty. Now, if I continue that line to the other side, you'll start to see that it does for something quite interesting. It adds what we call surface entertainment. Now, how much more exciting is that to look at a surface that's actually almost musical, almost telling you a story. This hood here has a lot of movement into it, a lot of play with light and dark, shadow and lightness, and it does work, obviously, to Ferrari's advantage. And they've become the masters, I think, of doing that type of treatment to the surfacing. I think there's a little bit of an issue for me with what we call the running lamps. These are the lamps, these are the lights that are always on when you're driving the car. And again, I've complained about it in some other episodes about different vehicles, but they all have the same issue. They're just a straight line with a light on it. And that is kind of like the simplest signature you can give to anybody. Imagine somebody putting an X down on a piece of paper as their signature. It really doesn't communicate the personality of the person. So now the other interesting thing about the headlights on this Ferrari is that this area here is not really a headlamp. It's an intake, nice, take in air through this area, perhaps through this area as well, but the headlights on the vehicle are actually located right here. That's pretty cool. It's pretty innovative. I've seen it done before, especially with BMWs doing it in sort of a similar fashion at the moment. But it's a way to actually lighten up the area around the headlight and give it a function in terms of feeding the engine with air. Lastly, from the front view, I think one of the more interesting parts of the design, which is quite minimal actually, you probably won't even notice it, is how they treat the section line on the outside of the bumper. Now you see that's pretty much what your eye is doing, following that break of the color, of the body color to the tire. Now the tire is actually following here, and you've got a lot of offset here. If you take a point directly above the center of the front wheel, go 30 degrees forward, that point, which is probably around in here somewhere, still has to cover the rubber of the outside of the tire. So that's what they've done. But they want the body to pull in, because that does give you the sensation, I said it on my last episode, where the tire looks more underbodied, over-tired, which is always a good planted look to the car. So they've done that, but then obviously to cover the tire, they still had to add an additional piece, but that is in black. And you'll see that later from the side view, that they found a trick to actually make it appear as if the front wheel is popping out, bulging out from the center of the car. Now, having said all that, let's move to the side view, and I think there are going to be a few elements on the side view that might raise your eyebrows in terms of design. Now, moving to that stunning side view of this car, I think it's imposing. I think it's got quite a bit of presence. It's absolutely gorgeous in my book. It has nothing to do with any other car in its segment. I mean, this doesn't, for me, look like an SUV or an SAV or even a crossover. It's something really finding its own way in that segment. Now, there are a few elements on here that I think I'm not too happy with, but let's check them out slowly. Let's start with the front of the car. And that is something that designers are very happy to do, which is to provide very minimal offset of the front end. In other words, where's your bumper on here? Aesthetically, it looks great. Performance-wise, I'm not so sure you would be happy if you had somebody back into the car and hit that part first or that part first. Obviously, something has to hit first, but it's going to be quite expensive if you have that part damaged from just a minor shunt. So moving slowly backwards, you're going to see a few things that you might start to realize for the first time that it actually could have been perhaps slightly improved, if we want to use that word. And one is this. This is the bonnet, the hood, as we call it. But in real life, it's not called a bonnet or a hood. In automotive terms, we refer to this as what we call a clamshell bonnet or a clamshell hood. Now, the Italian word for a clamshell bonnet is actually cofango. Cofano means hood, parafango means fender. If you combine the two, you get what's called the cofango. Now, the shut line of the cofango starts here, goes straight up over the wheel arch, and then directly back like that. Is that ideal? Perhaps you might think so, but I have a problem seeing a line start, stop, and then being interrupted by a curve and then continuing like that. In my opinion, the better solution would have been to start the line here, go directly to that corner there, a much cleaner, much more pure line. No reason why they can't do it, and you wouldn't have that start, stop, and brake as you see it here. Now, another interesting thing that I find very innovative, but perhaps not optimized, is the wheel arch itself. You'll see that there is actually an end to the body color through here, and then an offset of another wheel arch, which is in black, actually it's carbon fiber, that goes like this. And this whole unit here is actually an air outlet through here, and then it continues all the way through here, and that's sort of to give it maybe a more masculine look, maybe a less voluminous look from here to here. But that offset there, between here and here, does give the feeling, the sense of this vehicle being almost too high up in the air. I would much prefer to see that this carbon fiber piece here was actually in body color. You still have a gap, this gap where it's sort of floating off the body, off the side of the car. And you would have that body colored fender arch just slightly hovering over the front wheel as well as in the rear wheel, and a much more cohesive, much more lowered look to the vehicle. Now, a stunning piece of design, of surfacing on this car that is quite subtle. You might not see it until I actually demonstrate it, but it is this masterful control through here of the shoulder of the fender, or the cofango as we call it. And as it goes up, it peaks. You can see that it peaks directly over the center line of the front wheel. That is beautiful design. I mean, it gives the driver a feeling of knowing exactly where the front wheels are placed. Very beautiful, very well executed. As we move back, a few elements that I'm not so sure why they've done it. It's done, but perhaps there's a reason I'm not aware of it. Why do they have a slight bit of black underneath the base of the A-pillar? It gives it a sort of unconnected feeling, the A-pillar, to the body of the car. Normally, if you're going to have a body color A-pillar, you would run it all the way down to here. You have a connection, sort of a strong structural support, but instead they've placed an element of black just underneath the A-pillar, and it gives it this sort of disconnected floating look to the base of the A-pillar. Not sure why they've done that. Now, one more element that might seem cool, but it doesn't come across so cool in my book, is the door handle. Now, why am I complaining about a flush fitting door handle on a Ferrari? That's quite modern. Now, the rear door handle might surprise you. It's actually integrated in the waistline molding right here at the base of the B-pillar. And it's, by the way, what we call a suicide door, which means that the hinging of the rear door is actually located towards the back. So the rear door will actually open this way. It's sort of a much more comfortable way of allowing ingress and egress, entering and exiting the vehicle. But again, if you're going to go to that extreme of trying to hide the door handle, why not move that door handle up to here and eliminating any sense of having a door handle on the car, which again is a bit of visual clutter. So I think that would be a much better solution. Another, again, masterful, for me at least, type of sculpturing, of surfacing on this vehicle is the way they've actually minimized what we call the visual weight, again, of the side of the car. You can see that from the belt line down to the bottom of the sill panel, the rocker panel, there's a lot of curvature going on. There's this ice cream scooped out section sort of thing. Then you come down to what is the rocker panel, the sill panel area, and that they make a quite strong graphic break up there with another color, perhaps it's carbon fiber, but you can see the intensity, the amount of contrast between this area here, the light breakup of this line that runs through here, the highlight, and this line through here. There's quite a bit of light, dark sort of going on, which kind of eliminates that solid, boring feeling that we demonstrated before that the front end, or actually the clamshell, does not have either. So very well done. Now with a clean screen, I can show you a couple other things that I do appreciate and do question, obviously. One is the crispness of the line coming through here, and then gradually fading out as it goes through there. So it's kind of like an edge that's alive. It's starting very sharp, very crisp, and then gently becomes organically soft. That is beautiful control of a line. Now I'll remove that line so you can see it again as it fades towards the rear as it goes through the rear door panel. Now lastly, I want to touch on one item on the rear of the car, which is the ultimate thing I think in car design, is to create something that is feminine and masculine at the same time and desirable to both women and men, which is what you would either call broad shoulders, very muscular approach, or you would call it sort of the very sexy hip area of the car. So this area here, just above the rear wheel, sort of the rear quarter area, is this section through here. The wider you can make that, the more offset you have between the greenhouse or the belt line, the waistline, and that area there, the stronger the car is going to look like from the rear. It's going to appear much more substantial, much more attractive. Ferrari has done it very well. Again, that I wouldn't call it crispness, but organicness, and how it just leans and sort of guides your eye back into the rear of the car, connecting the rear to the side of the car. Very well done. Now let's see how it connects with a close analysis of the rear. Now as we move to that rear view, you can start to see that connection that I was just speaking about, the shoulder, the masculine broad shoulder approach, or that feminine, beautiful, sensual shape from the waist into the hip area. And that's accentuated, emphasized, as you see this area here starting to catch quite a bit of light as it rotates around towards the back. Now there are a few things in general from the rear view which irk me a little bit, which are the taillights. And I won't end, and I will probably never give up saying that I believe a Ferrari should have at least 2, even better 4 round taillights. I can't understand why they've gone away from that. It's such a signature of what Ferrari was and should be, perhaps continuing to be in the future. But again, I think the identity of the rear suffers a little bit when it could be more Ferrari-esque if we had round taillights here. Then one of the more impressive things that I like about the rear end is what we call the very minimal offset, like we saw in the front, of the rear bumper to the tailgate. Now, you can see how the taillight comes down and the shut line goes through there. Very nicely done because you hide it for most of its length underneath here. Very well done. But again, that offset of this line to the rear of the bumper, it's quite minimal. Again, I think it's perhaps because they're using very good foam material for the impact, but it's very well done. It's none of that large offsets that we're used to seeing in very normal cars, let's call it. Now, another thing that's very clear on the back view of this car is that Ferrari is really trying very hard to reduce what we call that visual weight, again, of the surfaces of this car. It's a large car, obviously, and they want to reduce the impression of visual mass. How do they do that on the rear end? A couple ways they've done it. One is the surface treatment. Obviously, you have that surface coming down, flicking out. This is actually a light catcher area. It's flipping upwards. And then you have it coming down here and then catching less light as it comes through here. So you got a lot of that, again, that surface change of light, dark, which kind of reduces that clinicalness of a design and makes it a little bit more entertaining to look at. We call it surface entertainment, obviously. But that's one way, and obviously these aren't really very functional to say, but what perhaps is functional, I kind of doubt it though, is this area through here, which seems to be letting air out of somewhere. I don't know where. The wheel well is through this area here, so I seriously doubt that any air is coming out of here from the wheel well area. Perhaps it is, but really this seems more of almost a gimmick of design rather than pure intent and pure function. So that curvature, that sort of inflection of material, that's a positive, negative surface changes. They've done it very well. Obviously it works with the Ferrari. I just hope that it's a intentional and purposeful design area. Now that's enough about the exterior of the car. Let's jump inside. Now it seems that Ferrari has learned a lesson very well, much better than most of the competition, which is you have passengers when you're in a car with 2 seats in the front. You don't want to forget about the passenger, especially in a car like this where performance is elevated and interesting to follow. You don't want the passenger looking over at what you're doing. You want to have what you call a driver-focused interior for the pilot, for the driver himself. And Ferrari does that well. Obviously, they have this area which is very driver-focused. My only issue with that area is that it's slowly becoming a little bit too electronic for a sports vehicle in terms of that joy of manipulating, of touching things, what you call haptic. You get a little bit of a click, a little bit of a sound. The more electronic a Ferrari becomes, I think the less Ferrari it becomes, because you're losing that interaction that allows you to feel like you're controlling the vehicle. Just to put your finger on an electric area which is touch sensitive, for example, to start the vehicle or anything like that, takes a little bit of joy away from being, say, at one with the vehicle, especially a vehicle like this. So I kind of miss the days that we have or have had where you can actually have that joy of manipulating things in the car. They've kept the Manettino, I'm very happy to say. I love the Manettino for reasons, if you know, you know. But again, there's a lot of electronics going on here. A little bit less, I think, than the last vehicles that have been coming out. You still have a few options of actually turning knobs and things like that. But again, not as much as we've had in the past. And that's one of the things that I don't think antiquated design, but do give it quite a bit of unique character and joy of ownership, because it's your car. You get to control it. It's not controlling you too much. But most of all, what's impressive for me is what I said at the beginning. They haven't forgotten about the passenger, and they have their own passenger infotainment area, which is this whole area here. It's not just that little area that shows you what speed you're going at or what the revs are. It gives you a whole list of options to go through. Credit to Ferrari for making that sort of the new direction, I would say, in terms of automotive interior design, helping the passenger to have just as nice a time as you without driving the car. And now I want to look at something that is very rare for a Ferrari. And that, my friends, is a Ferrari with rear seats with plenty of room. Ferrari have never really offered a car with room in the back, and this is the first one. And my gosh, does it look stunning. I mean, this is worthy of being the front seats of a Ferrari. That sort of attention to design detail. You can look at those seats and say, these are going to be very comfortable seats to sit in. You're getting individual attention to yourself sitting in either of these 2 seats. It would perhaps be the first Ferrari that I would be semi-comfortable sitting in the back of. I mean, obviously, if you're in a Ferrari, you want to be driving it. Next best position is to the side of that. Third best position is probably nowhere, but nowadays with 4 seats in a Ferrari, 2 in the back that you can comfortably sit in, that could actually be a place of luxury. Now that I've had a chance to look at the car much more in detail, let me summarize how I feel. Now, as always, let me break down the design evaluation into 3 distinct categories. Number 1, proportions. Is this car, the Ferrari Purosangue, well proportioned? And my gosh, is it well proportioned? Not only is it well proportioned, it's distinctly proportioned, much because of that V12 in the front, the mass of the front, the long bonnet, which gives it that very classic sports car feel. We remember the cars of the day in the past when they had the long bonnet, the long hood to accommodate the engine. But not only because it has a V12, but because it gives it that sort of cabin rearward sort of approach. And you have this feeling of a car that kind of belongs in the past, kind of belongs in the future, but is so well executed, so well surfaced that it automatically catapults it into the future as a version of a Ferrari that hasn't existed before, but marks its own way towards the future of the marque. Number 2, does this car have desirability? Going with taste, my taste says yes, it's definitely a desirable machine. It's not cheap, That's always going to be a factor, because if you're looking for a Ferrari, you either better have a few Ferraris in your history before you pounce for something like this, because it's, again, quite expensive in its segment. But yes, absolutely, for me, desirable. It's got enough of things that are sort of innovative, yet still in the line of thinking of being a Ferrari. So again, desirable, absolutely. Lastly, is it identifiable? Does it have a uniqueness to it that makes it stand out in its segment? Well, if this doesn't have it, I don't know what does, because there are a lot of elements that make this uniquely identifiable as a Ferrari. Obviously pushing forward with some of the headlight and taillight treatments, and you have to accept that nothing stays the same forever. But again, Ferrari has done it. Ferrari's done it in their own way. And perhaps it could be a bit stronger in terms of identity, in terms of that what we call light signature. But the rest of it, quite Ferrari, quite uniquely Ferrari, quite Italian, quite Latin, curvaceous, sexy, muscular, whatever you want to call that. It definitely has that feel to the car. So again, strong identity, and credit obviously to Flavio Manzoni and his team for creating a new, very beautiful, very excellent, very well executed, and definitely the building block for all the future SUVs or SAVs or whatever you want to call this vehicle in the future for the Ferrari marque. Now for that always difficult, always contentious design rating. I am going to give the Ferrari Purosangue a 9.55. Thank you very much for watching. As always, let me know in your comments below what you think about the design of the Ferrari Purosangue. Do you think Ferrari should have stayed out of this segment? Or do you think it's a brave step in a new direction for this iconic Italian brand? Again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.